What you see in the viewports is brought to you by the Interactive Viewport Renderer, or IVR. It tries to display the scene as realistically as possible, but it has to do its job in real time. This allows you interactive flexibility so that you can orbit, pan, and zoom in the viewport while you're working and get a feel for the materials in the scene. However, it's a compromise because these materials can represent these surfaces with much more realism, but the IVR is not showing that information to us. To see that, we need to render the scene with a different renderer. I'll go over here and open up the Render Scene dialog, and I'll scroll down to the bottom and open up the Assign Renderer rollout. Here we can see that the current production renderer is assigned here to the Scanline renderer. This is the default system in Max and Viz. And this is what this module will be covering. You can change the renderer to one of many different options. Mental Ray is a renderer that ships with Max and Viz. And V-Ray is a popular third-party renderer. To make a test rendering, I'd like to set the pixel size to a smaller amount so that it will be calculated more quickly. I'll click this preset button to make a rendering that measures 320 by 240 pixels in size. Click Render, and we'll see this pop-up window here called the Rendered Frame Window, or RFW for short. It shows us the image here, and if you right-click, you can see pertinent information about the pixels that make up the rendering. We can see reflection in the hardwood floor, gloss on the surface. We can even perceive the individual floorboards that make up this material. So it's obviously much higher quality than the IVR can show us. So if you're using Viz, you have to make test renders whenever you want to see the result of your materials. A quick way of doing that is simply to click this teapot over here to do a quick render. And you'll see the RFW appear, and you can check it out. However, if you're using Max, you can see the result of a scanline rendering in the viewport. Do that by right-clicking on the viewport label and choosing Views Active Shade. Now we see the rendering right here in the viewport, so this is great. If you try to pan, you cannot do it. If you try to zoom, you can zoom in and out of the rendering. If you zoom in, that becomes more obvious because you can perceive the individual pixels that make up this rendering. They call it active shade because it's live. It's linked to the changes that you make to the materials. I'll open the editor and make a change to the hardwood floor, let's say. Perhaps I'll increase the reflection amount to 40%. When I do that, it's immediately rendered and we see the result. If you look closely, you'll see progress bars appear on the top and right edges of the active shade window. I'll change reflection back to 10% and hit enter. And if you look closely, you might see that progress bar. Now in a complex scene where you have lots going on, this could take some time. Active shade does not respond to moving objects. So if I have this chair and I move it over here, maybe I'll rotate it, it doesn't show up in active shade. If you want to see that, you have to right click on the active shade viewport and say initialize, and it will recalculate the rendering. However, if you add geometry, here I'll add a teapot to the top of the table here, it will trigger a new active shade calculation. If you find that your renderings are taking too much time, you can close active shade by right-clicking and using this quad. Try resizing the viewport and making it smaller. That's one solution. And then use active shade again, and it will be calculated a bit more quickly.